The night I watched the HOA president standing on a high school stage, hands shaking, reading an apology I had written for her, while 500 of her own neighbors chanted for her resignation. I realized that was the moment she finally understood what she had done to me, to my family, to this land, and the crazy part is, this was the same woman who tried to erase my entire ranch in 24 hours with a fake emergency order, and instead of losing everything, I ended up buying the ground right out from under her HOA and turning her little kingdom into my rental property. Yeah, that happened. And if you had told me a few months earlier that quiet, dirt under the nails me would pull that off, I would have laughed in your face. My name is Ethan Cole, and I trust dirt more than I trust people dirt. Doesn't lie to you. It tells you when it's dry, when it's tired, when it's been walked on by something that doesn't belong there. But people can smile at you and call themselves concerned citizens while they're signing the paperwork to bulldoze your life. You know what I mean? I grew up on Coal Ridge Ranch in Redwood County, about 160 acres of stubborn soil and old fences my family has held on to for 4 generations. The kind of place where the barn creaks in the wind and the boards have absorbed so many arguments and stories that it feels like a living relative. My great-grandfather built that barn out of rough timber. My grandpa Jack taught me to mend a saddle and read a storm. In that doorway. That building is older than most of the county. And to me, it's a cathedral. To my future enemy, it was a code violation. A few years back, Maple Ridge Estates popped up right next door, a sea of beige houses with perfect lawns and identical mailboxes. And with it came the Maple Ridge Estates, Homeowners Association, and their self-appointed queen, Linda Crowley. Imagine the most stereotypical HOA Karen you've ever heard of. Now put her in a white SUV with a clipboard and a permanent fake smile that's... Linda, she started small. Polite letters about odors from my cattle noise, from my tractor in the mornings, dust on their side of the property line. When we were baling hay, I ignored all that my land isn't in their HOA. My family was here long before their vinyl palaces existed. I figured if I stayed on my dirt, they'd stay on theirs. One afternoon, though, I heard tires crunch on the gravel by my gate and looked up to see that white SUV glowing there, like some kind of omen. Linda stepped out. Perfect hair, pressed clothes, sunglasses, and beside her was this skinny guy in a cheap suit with a county ID badge hanging from his neck, already sweating like he knew he shouldn't be there. I stayed on my side of the fence, wiped grease off my hands, and leaned on a post. "Mr. Cole," she said, sugar all over her voice. "We're here on official business." The guy cleared his throat and introduced himself as Daniel Collins from County Code Enforcement, he said. There had been an emergency inspection that morning, and my property had been declared a significant public hazard. As then Linda pulled out a thick envelope and clipped a single paper to my fence right at eye level. Red stamps, official seals, the whole 9 yards. My stomach dropped when I read the words, "Emergency Abatement Order." According to that piece of paper, I had 24 hours to begin demolishing unsafe structures on my ranch, which somehow included the barn, the outbuildings, and my house. If I didn't, the HOA, under some special provision she had pushed through, could bring in demolition crews, flatten everything, and stick a lien on my land, big enough to choke a horse. I looked from that paper to the barn, to the farmhouse my grandpa died in, and back to Linda. And I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, "You seriously think you can make me tear my whole place down in a day because it doesn't match your beige boxes?" She put on that sad, condescending smile. "It's not about us." "Ethan," she said, "it's about safety. It's about property, values. Then she leaned in, just a hair closer out of Colin's earshot, and dropped the sweetness. Your grandfather died out here alone on this worthless dirt. You don't have to make the same mistake. Take the buyout, walk away, or lose everything. For a second, everything went quiet, like someone turned down the sound of the whole world. My grandpa chose to die in that house because he wanted his last breath to smell like his fields. Hearing her spit that back at me like it was proof of his failure flipped something deep inside me. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. I wanted to tear that order down and shove it in her face, but instead I just stared at her because anger wasn't going to save my ranch. She raised her voice again so Collins could hear. You have 24 hours, mister. Coal for the good of the community. And then she turned, glided back into her SUV, and drove away. Dust from her tires settling on that emergency notice, like a second insult. I stood there for a long time, staring at that paper. 24 hours, to erase 100 years of my family, she thought. I was just some dumb rancher with a hot temper who would either blow up or cave in. And I almost did both. But instead, I went inside and picked up my phone. My best friend Mike answered like he always does. Half joke, half concern. What broke you or the tractor? I told him what happened, about the order, about Linda, about the 24 hours he went quiet. Then said, That's insane. You don't need a mechanic, you need a lawyer. There's this attorney, Rachel Kim. She likes taking HOAs apart. I'll text you her number. I called Rachel. She listened to the whole story, and you could hear the disbelief turning into cold focus on the other end. 24 hours for total abatement, she said. That's not just aggressive. That's outright illegal on half a dozen procedural levels. They're trying to steamroll you before you can fight back. I'll file for an emergency injunction tonight and push for a hearing at 10 a.m. tomorrow. But Ethan, if they show up in the morning with equipment, you have to stall them. No. Fists, no guns, no threats. Just delay, you hear me? So just stand in front of a bulldozer, I asked. Half joking. If that's what it takes, she said. You're an engineer. Get creative. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my barn collapsing in slow motion. So before sunrise, I was parked at the end of my driveway in my truck. Thermos of brutal coffee in one hand, phone in the other. The sky was just getting light. When I heard the engines, 2 bulldozers, a backhoe, a flatbed full of equipment, all rolling toward my gate like a little armored column. And at the back, Linda's white SUV, she stepped out, wearing a hard hat and a smile that said she was already tasting victory. The foreman and a couple of guys in vests got out too, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Linda walked up. Good morning, Ethan. We're here to help you with your compliance issue. Step aside. Please, I stayed where I was, right in front of the gate. There's a hearing at 10. I said, you're not touching anything until a judge looks at this. She laughed, sharp and ugly. An injunction. How cute you think some piece of paper is going to stop this. She nodded to the foreman. We are proceeding with the abatement. Start with the barn. The bulldozer clanked forward, inching toward me, and that was the moment I had to decide what kind of man I was going to be, the one who stepped aside, or the one who planted his boots. I walked up and stood directly in front of the gate, directly in the machine's path. Phone held in my hand, like it was a shield. I could feel the ground vibrating under me, the operator's eyes flicking between me and the foreman. You bring that thing 1 inch onto my property, I shouted over the engine, and I will have every one of you arrested for trespassing and destruction of property. My lawyer just texted the judge. Signed a temporary restraining order 15 minutes ago. If you cross this line, you're in contempt of court." I was bluffing my heart out. My phone screen was black, but I said it like it was the gospel. The foreman hesitated. "Ma'am, if there's any chance there's an order." "There is no order," Linda snapped. "He's lying. Move the equipment, or I'll hire someone with a spine." My phone buzzed in my hand. Right then, I glanced down. It was a text from Rachel. Granted 30 days. They can't touch a nail-nice stall. I almost laughed. The bulldozer operator's hand hovered over the controls. I lifted the phone up so they could all see it. "You really want to bet your house I'm lying," I said, "because the sheriff is on speed dial." The operator killed the engine. One of the contractors muttered that this wasn't worth getting locked up over and turned back to his truck. Linda's face went through a full-color chart, red to purple. Her jaw clenched so hard I thought it might crack. Her own phone buzzed. She checked it, and everything inside her expression just sagged. "We'll be back," she hissed. "This isn't over. You're right," I said. "It's not." After they left, my legs finally started shaking. I sank down onto the gravel and just sat there, letting it hit me that I had actually held off a convoy with nothing but a bluff and a little luck. But Sheriff Hayes was right when he told me later. This was just round one. Since she couldn't bulldoze me yet, Linda switched to slow torture volunteers. From the HOA would park on the road with long lenses, taking pictures of peeling paint, leaning boards, anything they could twist into evidence. Then one day I looked up from fixing a fence and saw two of them on my side of the fence, not on public road, on my land. Walking toward the barn, snapping photos, it was Todd, one of her bootlickers, and a big guy, built like a fridge with arms. I dropped my tools and walked toward them all. That anger I'd been swallowing bubbling back up. "You're trespassing," I said, low and flat. "Turn around and walk back to the road." "Easy, cowboy. We're just documenting a public nuisance for the HOA civic duty. I'm a rancher," I said. "Cowboys work for other people, I work for myself, and your civic duty stops at my fence line." The big guy stepped right up in my space, close enough that I could smell cheap energy, drink on his breath. "You don't look that tough," he said. Linda said, "You'd fold like a lawn chair." That fuse in my chest lit again. I shoved him back, told him to get off my land. He swung at me, a wild haymaker, and years of wrestling livestock did the rest. I stepped aside, hooked his arm, and dumped him in the dirt. He hit hard and stayed there, wheezing. I looked at Todd and asked if he wanted to try his luck. He dropped his camera and ran. Later that day, Sheriff Hayes pulled into my drive, leaning on his cruiser like a tired dad. "Ethan," he said, "I got a call saying you assaulted two upstanding Maple Ridge residents." I rolled my eyes and told him what really happened. He believed me, but he still gave me that look. "They are trying to bait you, man. They want you to snap on camera so they can paint you like some unstable redneck in court. Don't give them that. Beat them with paperwork, not punches, and watch your back because that woman doesn't fight fair." I learned just how unfair a few nights later. I woke up to the sound of panicked horses. If you've never heard it, it's different from normal galloping hire, frantic, full of pure fear. I grabbed my boots, ran outside, and saw the pasture by the barn was empty, the gate swinging open, which I checked every single night. The hair on my neck stood up. I sprinted along the fence line toward the county road and saw it in the moonlight. Clean cuts through my wire, like someone had taken bolt cutters to the top. And middle strands. Not wear, not an accident. Straight sabotage. Beyond that fence was a dark road, where trucks like to pretend the speed limit is a suggestion. I could hear hooves crashing through brush, and then faint at first, but getting louder, the whine of a semi's engine, and the screech of brakes. I broke through the tree line just in time to see Duke, my big golden goof of a horse, burst out onto the asphalt, eyes wide in the headlights. The truck's horn blasting rubber burning, and in that split second where time stretches out. Willow, my smaller, smarter, mare slammed her shoulder into Duke, knocked him sideways just enough that the truck roared past with inches to spare. The trailer fishtailed. The driver was cussing up a storm, and I grabbed Duke's halter with shaking hands, whispering, "Easy, easy, buddy," even though my own heart was trying to kick out of my chest. Once I got them back through the fence and calmed, I went back and looked at those cuts again, anger gone. Ice cold. I saw clear boot prints in the soft dirt, and a strip of dark blue fabric caught on the barbed wire, the same color as the security shirts some of Linda's guys liked to wear. So I started taking photos. Lots of them, every angle, every rent, every watt, because if she wanted to play dirty, I was done playing nice. That was the night I realized defending wasn't enough. She was going to keep coming and escalating until something broke. So I decided it wasn't going to be me or my horses or my barn. It was going to be her foundation. Literally the ground she stood on. I drove to the Redwood County Records office the next morning. This ugly building that smells like dust and old coffee, and I asked for every file they had on Maple Ridge and the land beneath it. The clerk, George, just shrugged and brought me boxes. I spent hours hunched over maps and deeds, tracing property lines like veins. And then I found a note in the margin of a 1979 plat. See ground, lease, 79 M parcel. I asked for that file, and when I opened it, my hands actually started to shake again, but this time in a good way. Turned out when the Moreno family sold land to the developers decades ago, they didn't sell everything. They kept 5 acres and leased the ground for 50 years. And on that particular 5-acre patch, the developers built the clubhouse, the pool, a string of townhomes, and the HOA's own office. So Maple Ridge didn't actually own the dirt under their precious amenities. They were just tenants. And the lease said that on expiration or transfer rent could be jacked up to current market value, or the lease could be terminated, and all structures would revert to the ground owner. Suddenly, the board's little empire looked a lot more fragile. I found the Moreno heirs. Turns out they lived in other states, and barely remembered they even had that lease when I explained what was happening, what Linda had been doing. They agreed to sell their rights for a price that was fair, but high enough to hurt. I went home and started liquidating everything I could. Savings, a trailer, some equipment. I even sold my grandpa's old John Deere to a neighbor with the promise that one day, if I could, I'd buy it back. Even after all that, I still came up short. That's when the phone rang, and a man introduced himself as Logan Pierce, local tech millionaire. Maple Ridge's least favorite neighbor. Henderson told me, "You might be looking for a partner," he said. And he told me how Linda's husband had tried to push an eminent domain grab on him years back, and how much money it cost him to fight them off. "I don't like bullies," he said. "I'll put up the rest for 49%. You keep control. Just promise me something when the time comes. Don't show them mercy." They never showed anyone else. I agreed. We set up Redwood Land Holdings LLC, lined up the wire transfer with the Moreno's lawyer, kept it quiet. Or so we thought. The day before closing, the eldest Moreno daughter called me, sounding nervous, and said an HOA lawyer had contacted them, tried to scare them with talk of violating original agreements, and then offered a much higher number if they sold to Maple Ridge instead. And suddenly, it turned into a race. Whichever wire hit first would likely win. Logan told me to be at the bank. When the doors opened, I barely slept that night, pacing my kitchen, checking the clock every few minutes at 8:30 a.m. The manager let me in. I signed the order so fast I almost ripped the paper. The transfer went through at 8:33. I walked out into the parking lot. Called the Morenos and held my breath. Your wire arrived about 5 minutes ago, she said, 2 minutes after that. A much larger one from the HOA's law firm came in, but our attorney rejected it. The lease is sold. Mr. Cole, it belongs to you now. That was the twist right there. Linda gave me 24 hours to kill my barn, and I beat her to the ground under her own office by 2 minutes. Suddenly, I was the landlord of everything she thought she ruled, and I'd be lying if I said that didn't feel good. But I also knew walking in and screaming, "I own you," wasn't going to fix anything, so I did what she had done to me. Only cleaner. I played with perception, Mike, and I built a giant sign and painted it white with huge red letters that said, "Attention tenants. This property is under new land ownership. All leases under review. Rent increased. 10x effective. Immediately. All payments to Redwood. Land Holdings, LLC. With Rachel's blessing." We also slipped notices to vacate under each townhome door. Not real evictions, just scary enough to make people ask questions. We installed the sign at the entrance in the middle of the night and waited. The next morning was chaos. Tenants reading the sign, screaming on their phones, waving papers, one guy yelling $20,000 a month. Are you kidding me? By the time Linda's white SUV screeched up, that place looked like a protest. She shoved through the crowd, read the sign. And when she saw me across the street leaning on my truck with a folder of legal documents, she looked like someone had pulled the rug out from under her soul. "What is this?" she snapped. "Take that sign down. These fake notices. This is fraud," I told her. I was simply informing my tenants that leases were under review, and that per the recorded ground lease, I could renegotiate rent on commercial property. Then I held up the deed transfer and the filed lease assignment and told everyone there. I now owned the land under their townhomes, their clubhouse, their HOA office, and they should probably ask their president how she let that happen. A guy in a suit waved his notice in her face, screaming, "How could you not know about this?" And Linda, cornered for once, managed to spit out, "This is unfair." And I just looked at her and said, real quiet, "Unfair is what you called it. When you fined a widow $500 for the wrong shade of beige and threatened a veteran over his wheelchair ramp. I'm not a monster. Linda, I'm a consequence." After that, it moved fast. The HOA lawyer called Rachel and begged for a meeting. We sat down in the clubhouse, and I laid out 2 paths one night. I cranked the commercial ground rent up to full market value. Blow a $2 million hole in their budget and watch them explain that to their homeowners. Or 2, they sign an agreement that permanently exempts my ranch from all HOA rules, pay to restore my barn properly, and force Linda to read a public apology, admitting everything they had. 72 hours to decide, and they chose what scared people always choose. They cut their queen loose and hoped the board would survive. That's how we ended up back in that high school auditorium, chairs full of angry Maple Ridge residents, board members sweating on stage, and Linda walking up to the microphone with a piece of paper in her shaking hands. She read my words out loud, confessed to using a falsified inspection report, to harassing me, to sending volunteers to trespass, to actions that endangered my animals and people driving on that road. The room went from murmurs to shouts, people yelling, "You lied to us, and you could have killed somebody." Then the chant started soft at first, then louder and louder. "Resign, resign, resign." And she stood there, shrinking behind the podium, as years of fear turned into something else in their faces. When Sheriff Hayes finally walked up the aisle and said he had some questions for her down at the station about footprints and blue fabric and a county inspector who had flipped, you could feel the air change. He told her she could come quietly, or he could make it official in front of everyone, and she chose the door with the least humiliation. But honestly, there wasn't much left to save. She walked out between those rows of people who wouldn't even look at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like the ground under my boots was steady again. So here's where I leave it with you. Was I too harsh? Did I take it too far when I bought the ground under that HOA and made her read that apology? Or was that exactly the kind of justice someone like that needs to see, to finally understand? They can't just weaponize rules against whoever they feel like. You know what I mean? If you've ever dealt with an out-of-control HOA, a petty boss, a power-tripping official, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments who you think was right, who was wrong, and what you would have done in my boots. And if you want more stories about quiet people pushing back when they finally get pushed too far, let me know, because I've got a few more where this one came from.